Thank you.
This is going to be fun.
Well, thank you, Adrian, for that very kind introduction. Ambassador, in August, you graciously hosted me in your country, together with your team at the U.S. mission to the United Nations. And this evening, I have the great honor and privilege to host you in my hometown, together with my team, 1,200 of my closest friends. Well, let's start talking a little bit about your work at the UN when it came to the issue of Israel. I think one of the iconic images from your time at the UN was the photo of you at the UN Security Council with your hand raised high, voting no to a draft UN Security Council resolution that would have condemned the United States for having moved its embassy to Jerusalem. It was 14-1. It was you versus the world, and you blocked it. You vetoed the resolution. That photo is such a powerful image. If I could ask you, what was going through your mind at that moment?
Well, first let me say that was one of my proudest moments. Absolutely, without question, one of my proudest moments. I didn't feel like I was standing alone. I felt like I was fighting for the truth and fighting for what was right. And I was mad. I mean, if you look, if I gave them the side eye, which I probably did, it was because, look, every country has the sovereign right to put their embassy wherever they choose. The United States chooses to always have its embassy in the capital. So why would we not have it in Jerusalem? Because Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. That's just a fact. But this was so much more than just moving the embassy. This was about telling the truth. And this was about making sure that the rest of the world can't hide what we know as fact. But more importantly, the Palestinians need to acknowledge the fact that the capital of Israel is Jerusalem, and the Arab countries around that needed to acknowledge, quit making the Palestinians think otherwise, and acknowledge what we know is true, and let's do like we do for every other country and put the embassy in the capital, which is what we did. It was something we were so right to do. The president had great courage to do it, and it was just a proud moment. Even if I was standing alone, I knew I was standing for what was right.
Now, the Security Council was a body that you discovered quite quickly had a special focus on Israel. In fact, I will never forget the initial press conference that you gave. I guess it's a briefing to the press, your very first one, that I remember. It was written about in the New York Sun. There was an editorial called Haley's Comet. And I read it and I said, I hadn't seen it. It hadn't really been published. And I found the video, I put it on the internet, and it just started to explode and go viral. Within a day or two, I could see 7 million views just on our channel. Other people, millions and millions of people saw it. Can you walk us through a bit your first arrival at the Security Council and seeing their particular focus on Israel?
Well, I was very surprised that the video blew up because I wasn't that good. You know, it was really more off the cuff. It was really talking about what I had seen. And one of the things that I did going into the United Nations, I studied a lot of foreign policy, the issues that I knew we would be dealing with and the issues that I knew were important. What I didn't do purposely was study the way the UN worked. And I didn't want to do that because I wanted to go in with fresh eyes. I wanted to go in not tainted with what the status quo had always done. I wanted to go in and just see what I thought. And people don't believe this, I really had no experiences with Israel. I had never been to Israel. I didn't really know much about, I knew the historical things, but I didn't really know a lot about the people of Israel or any of those issues. But what I saw in that council reminded me of what it felt like to be bullied when I was a kid. And I have no patience for bullies. And what I saw in that council wasn't just bullish behavior, it was abusive behavior. They were kicking Israel just because. They didn't even have the facts to do it. It was like fun for them. And for me, it was disgusting. And so that was the reason I went out there, was basically to say, look, we've got a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of issues, but this is one thing we're not going to do. We're not going to have these Israel bashing sessions, and we're not going to continue to allow this abuse to happen. And if you do it, I'm going to call you out on it every single time. I just was trying not to waste my time and let them know now this isn't going to happen anymore. And it did blow up, and I think in some ways that's really sad, because if people celebrate the truth, I mean, my parents always said that's what you do. You shouldn't be surprised by someone telling the truth. This shouldn't be an unusual event for someone to tell the truth. And I think people have to start telling the truth about Israel, because they're thinking it, they're just not saying it. And I think that was a lot of what I wanted to happen, was let's start calling this out for what it is. And you know what we did over time, those Israel bashing sessions, they would bash and I would talk, because it was supposed to be a session on the Middle East, I would talk about lots of other things like Hamas and like what was happening in Lebanon and what was happening in Yemen, and go into all of these other issues. So they would all go and talk about Israel and I would talk about my issue. And then over time, it started to stop.
You brought up Hezbollah, you brought up ISIS, the real issues in the Middle
All
East.
of those things that really were important that we needed to discuss. And so what you saw were ambassadors started to be somewhat embarrassed if they were to say something. We certainly didn't stop it, but it really changed the tone of what was happening in those sessions. And I still think we have a long way to go, but I think it was very telling at how they realized after being called out how wrong it was. And if you look at the Arab countries, they have a lot of oil, they have a lot of money, and so they started picking up all of these other countries to vote with them. And I think that's how this started. If you actually go into the quiet corners of the UN, most countries don't hate Israel. They really don't. Most countries envy Israel. Most countries think Israel is valuable. They just don't know how to say it or how to vote against it, because those Arab countries continue to put pressure on them. But the other side of it is, the Arab countries know it. We were having a meeting on Yemen, and I was meeting with a couple of the Arab countries, and they were saying, you know, I don't know why no one calls out the Houthis. I don't know why they acknowledge them. This isn't a real group. All they do is they call it this terrorist activity. They were saying all these things, and I literally was distracted by it. And I said, I'm sorry, I know we're talking about Yemen, but everything you just explained is no different than what Hamas is doing with Israel. I said, it's the exact same story. And they were just quiet. After that, they took me to the side and they said, we know you're right. We know you're right. And I said, then why do it? What's with all the resolutions? Why do it? And they said, we do it for our constituencies. We just have to keep doing it to show them that we're doing something. So the real leadership needs to come from the Arab communities. The real leadership needs to be from those Arab countries who know now that Israel isn't the one doing all of this, that Iran is the one that's doing this. They feel it, they're suffering because of it, and we've got to keep the pressure on them to acknowledge it. I think we're going to get there, I really do. We have to get the Palestinians to the table. We've got to have a conversation, and the Arab communities have to tell them the truth. Because if I can see a difference in them at the UN, if I can see that they're trying to show me that they're changing, we need the leadership. We need the governments to start moving in that direction. And I think, I'm not saying anything about the election, so don't get mad at me, but I will tell you, Netanyahu has done a very good job of reaching out to Russia, reaching out to Saudi Arabia, reaching out to those countries, and, well, the U.S. did it. You've had over 600 resolutions against Israel, and for the first time, we got a majority to recognize that Hamas was a problem in Israel. That had never happened before. A majority of the General Assembly acknowledged that. And so, literally, they had never acknowledged Hamas before. So to suddenly say, after all of this time, yes, they're causing problems, yes, they're part of the problem, I think that, again, we're moving the ball. We just have to keep doing that. You know, we won the majority last time. Next time, I want us to win a whole resolution. I want us to push it even further. But I do think we just have to keep going. And I think when I got there, my first meeting, the first ambassador I wanted to meet with was Danny Danone. And it was from a personal disappointment of what had happened with Resolution 2334. The resolution that was just, it went against Israel at a time that Israel really needed the U.S. And
this is, of course, the resolution in the final days of the Obama administration,
yes,
which they allowed to pass, and which recognized or declared that the old city of Jerusalem is occupied Palestinian territory, including the holy sites of Judaism.
It was terrible, but what was worse was after I had done some asking of ambassadors, the U.S. led that resolution. Other countries actually didn't want to do it, and the U.S. led that. So I was going into the UN with so much disappointment. And then when I met with Ambassador Danone, to hear what he went through, when that resolution was there at the Security Council, and he was there, and everybody voted against Israel, and then your one true ally, the one that's always supposed to be there for you, abstained, that wasn't hurtful enough. But everyone on the council and everyone in the audience stood up and applauded. And Danny's just sitting there. It was the United States' saddest hour. And so I told him, I said, I want you to know right here, right now, that will never happen again under my watch. We will never allow that to happen.
And I just want to read to you what the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who was just in Jordan this weekend, what he said about UNRWA. He said that the UNRWA students are learning about democracy. At UNRWA, they're learning about human rights, they're learning about tolerance, they're making the conditions to be exemplary citizens. This is something, he said, that warms my heart. Do you feel the same way about UNRWA?
No, not at all. And this, again, understand that I learned this as going through the process. So when I saw UNRWA, of course, when you see a refugee organization, you think it's there to do good, it's there to provide benefits to those who can't provide for themselves. When I got to the UN and I was fighting for Israel just because I thought it was the right thing to do, I finally told my staff, I said, you know, I think I need to visit Israel. I'm sitting here fighting for a country I've never been to. So I went to Israel, went to every aspect of it, went to the UNRWA camps, went and saw what they do and how they do it. They have the potential to do good. But what I towards the end really told the UNRWA officials is they have to reform this agency. What they're doing is they're growing refugees over time to infinity. No other country does that. No other organization does that, and it's not sustainable. The second thing that I noticed over the time was they always said that they were running out of money. If we don't get money, the schools are going to close. We have to get money so the schools close. Happened over and over again. And so the U.S. State Department would say, oh, you got to give UNRWA money. Well, to me, when you looked at it, UNRWA needed to be reformed. Why do we keep giving more money? How are you spending that money? So we start looking at how it's spending. We look at their textbooks. We look at the way they're teaching. I went and saw the paintings on the wall in the UNRWA camps and all of those things. I mean, you can tell there is a toxic situation there. So I went to the president and I said, I don't think we should give UNRWA any money anymore. And
it's a lot of money. It's $300–400 million a year. It's a huge amount.
It is. And he said, and There were others in the administration that disagreed with me. And I said, just trust me on this. Don't give any money, and I bet you the schools won't close. This is a fundraising mechanism, I'm convinced. I said, just do this. Well, the Secretary of State at the time, the president said, okay, let's not give any money. Secretary of State at the time went ahead and gave half, even though the president told him not to. It was probably the best thing that ever happened, because after he gave half, I got to call the president, and he said, Nikki, I told Rex not to give that money. He goes, I can't believe he gave the money. I said, no, but let me tell you what happened. I said, we didn't get a thank you note from UNRWA. They didn't call us and say, we appreciate it. I said, they held a protest in the streets blaming the U.S. for not giving more. And that was it. The president said, I'm done, no more, we're not going to do it. So we cut all the funding to UNRWA, and guess what? The schools still have not closed. But we went a step further. This is not the U.S. trying to be harsh or hateful. That was not the case. We want to, look, the Palestinians deserve a better life. They do. And that's why I feel so strongly about the peace plan. That needs to happen. But UNRWA it's not being honest with the people it serves, and it's not being honest with the people giving the money. But this is where I went further. At a Security Council meeting, because the U.S. was getting criticized heavily from every country in the world for the fact that we weren't giving UNRWA money, I listed out every amount of money that every Arab country was giving UNRWA. Combined, it didn't match what the U.S. was giving.
Including all the oil-rich countries.
Including all of them. And I called each one out and said, if you truly cared about the Palestinians, and if you truly think UNRWA is so great, why aren't you stepping up? Why aren't you taking care of them? It's not America's problem to take care of this situation.
Speaking of the Palestinians, I want to say a word or two about the PA. I mean, America and the West have given billions of dollars to the Palestinian Authority over many years, yet they continue to fund terrorists. I'd like to get your thoughts. What can we do to change things at the PA? And specifically, the PA had some sharp words about you. Did that bother you?
No, it did. Look, it didn't bother me. I mean, I think that, they told me to shut up or something like that. And, I'm not going to. My husband will tell you it's impossible. I don't shut up. Look, when it comes to the Palestinians, again, I'm going to speak from the truthful side of me. I pray for a peace deal. I don't just pray it for Israelis, I pray it for Palestinians. I pray for the fact that all of this just finds its own place. The only two sides that can decide this are the Israelis and the Palestinians. The U.S. doesn't need to do this. But we do need to bring them to the table. And as long as Abbas is there, it's never going to happen. I mean, it's just never going to happen. And as long as the Arab countries continue to appease him and make him think that he has the right to do this and say the thing, it's not going to happen. But we do want to see the quality of life for Palestinians get raised. We do want to see children get an education. We do want to see health care for everyone. We do want to see all of those things happen, but not at the expense of the security of Israel. And so,
coming back to the UN, there's a question that I think everyone would like to know from an expert such as yourself. We talked about how Israel is condemned 20 times every year by the UN General Assembly, when at most there's one resolution on some of the worst regimes like Iran, Syria, or North Korea. So we know that's absurd, but I think people wonder, do UN resolutions matter? What impact do they have, if any at all?
I don't think they matter. I don't. This is one of the interesting conversations. After I had been at the UN a year, the president, we were meeting on something, and he said, so Nikki, what do you think? Should we stay in? Should we get out? what do you think? You've been there a year. And I said, ultimately the American people are going to have to decide, but this is the way I see it. It's heavily bureaucratic. It's doubled in size in the last 10 years of people that they've hired. And the only reason they hire them is because every country is fighting to have more of their people in the UN. So it's not ever reducing, it's just getting bigger. It's extremely wasteful. The money that is spent, they are in the process of a reform, but it's got so far to go. I mean, we were able to cut $1.3 billion in just the first year, and that was a drop in the bucket.